سيداتي سادتي، اسمي ميشائيلا إكارت، أعمل مديرة مشروع النساء يتحدثن عن السلام لدى منظمة البرلمان، وهي منظمة ألمانية غير حكومية. يشرفني أن نفتد اليوم الثاني من مؤتمر النساء العراقيات يتحدثن عن السلام اللي بيتم تنظيمه وتنفيذه بمناسبة الذكرى
on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the issuance of the UN Security Council Resolution number 1325 on women and peace. This conference is held within the framework of the project Women Talking Peace, funded by the GIZ on behalf of the German federal government and organized by the organization of elbarlament in Iraq. I would like to make use of this opportunity to thank all those who contributed in accomplishing this conference, and particularly I'd like to thank those experts who have worked directly or indirectly or in the context of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which have contributed to this conference with their knowledge and experience. I would furthermore like to thank a wide range of participants, male and female, which are those for which we have organized this conference, in fact. On the first day, we brought together government officials, experts, women's organizations, representatives of Iraqi civil society, so as to do some brainstorming about the agenda of women, peace and security. Today, we're going to build upon this and further complete the discussion about this subject and bring together religious leaders and women from government organizations. And we also have invited activists from civil society, young people, to listen to their visions about peace building in Iraq. And now I'd like to summarize yesterday's programs and introduce today's program. Yesterday, on the 11th of December, we had the participation of Dr. Birgit Laubach opening the conference, and also Youssef al-Shukri, the senior advisor to the President of Iraq, and Dr. Oladil, the German ambassador to Iraq, and Susanne Leichtweiss, program director at the German Corporation for International Cooperation, GIZ, who opened and gave their welcome addresses to the conference yesterday. Thank you very much. Yesterday, on the 11th of December, we had the participation of all of the following: Sausan Arif, founder and director of Women Empowerment Organization in Iraq; Jamal al-Jawahiri, the executive director of the Iraqi Al-Amal Association; Dr. Yusra Al-Alaq, general manager of Women Empowerment Department of the Council of Ministers in Iraq, in the panel discussion about challenges, obstacles and opportunities in regard to the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325. And I'd like to thank them very much for their visions and their contributions, their very worthwhile contributions to the panel discussion. In the afternoon, we held a second panel discussion about peace, in which participated 5 women from Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Egypt and Jordan, and they contributed their points of view about women and their contribution to peace building in all parts of the MENA region. Here, I'd like to thank Dr. Maria Al-Abda, the Executive Director of Women Now for Development from Syria, Dr. Salman Nims, the Secretary General of the Jordanian National Commission for Women's Affairs from Jordan, Mrs. Sausan Zakzak, a writer and women rights activist from Syria, Mrs. Fairuz Ahmed Al-Jaradi, a lawyer and human rights activist from Yemen, and Mrs. Muzan Hassan, founder and executive director of Nazra for Feminist Studies from Egypt, for their contributions to the panel discussion. Today, once again, we have a rich program ahead of us. We're going to start with a panel discussion about the role of women in peace building in Iraq. The discussion is going to be held between Intisar al-Jabouri, a member of the Iraqi parliament, and the head of the Women's, Children's and Family Committee of the Iraqi parliament, and Dr. Ilham Makki, gender advisor and researcher with the Al-Amal Association in Iraq. After this discussion, we are going to enjoy two cultural presentations. At 11:45, we are first going to watch a film, Identity Skills, two films who were produced within the context of a project held by elbarlament under the header of Women Make Film in Iraq. Then we are going to listen to a musical presentation by a Syrian group. And we're going to have the lunch break with this music performance. Then after lunch, in the afternoon, we're going to contribute our panel discussions while focusing on the promotion of women's rights by religious leaders. And we're going to be honored by the presence of Amal Jalal Muhammad, the head of the Public Authority for Tourism in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, Father Ra'id Adel from the Syriac Catholic Church in Mosul, Mr. Karim Suleiman, the Supreme Advisor to the Yazidi spiritual leader in Iraq, Dr. Magdi Karim Taha, Professor of Islamic Sciences at Salah ad-Din University, Dr. Pascal Eshuwarda, former Minister of Migration and Displaced People, and the head of the Hammurabi Human Rights Organization. And last but not least, Mr. Said Saleh Al-Hakim, the head of the Hikmah Center for Dialogue and Cooperation. The last panel discussion of this conference is going to be held with 5 young activists from different regions in Iraq. We would like to listen to their points of view of peace building and the contribution and the role of women and their visions for the future of Iraq. We are going to be honored by the presence of all of the following: Inas Karim, Diana Faraj, Hélène Abdel Wahid, Ludia Ramoun Albert, and Ruha Al Amin. Dr. Birgit Laubach, the head or the chairwoman of the executive board of the elbarlament organization, is going to close the conference at 4:30 in the afternoon. I hope that we're going to have exciting discussion and fruitful results of the panel discussions and new points of view about the agenda of women, peace, and the achievement of security for all of us. And I wish all of you to enjoy the short film and the musical performance during the lunch break. I wish you an excellent second day of the conference. And now I'm going to hand the floor back to the facilitator of the conference, Kinda Hatta, who is going to accompany you throughout the day. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Michaela, for this opening of today's meeting. And today we continue our conference about women and peace in Iraq. And we had a very interesting discussion yesterday. And today we again, there will be a lot of information and a lot of benefit of this discussion about the role of women in peace building. Good morning. Here in Berlin, we will be together again today during this day, and we again ask you during this discussion that you send us your questions by email, questions elbarlament.org, and we will ask these questions to the speakers today. Again, welcome, and we hope it will be an interesting day. We start this day and this meeting about the role of women in peace building in Iraq with Mrs. Intisar al-Jabouri, member of the Iraqi Parliament and President of Women, Child and Family Committee of the Iraqi Parliament, who will talk about the participation of women in peace building, and for about 10 minutes. Please. Good morning, dear sisters and dear audience. At the beginning, I would like to thank everybody who is organizing this conference, especially the elbarlament conference in Germany. Thank you very much for the interest for Iraq and for the Iraqi women. Thank you for your participation, and I thank you for participating in this conference. Dear sisters, dear brothers, the Iraqi women, during a long history of the Iraqi people, they have been an active half of the Iraqi society, and we should accept this, and the Iraqi people has been living under difficult conditions, especially the women in Iraq, and but it had also been proved that she is able to bear responsibility, and it is possible to stand up and to come across and to overcome the challenges. And Iraqi women have played an important role in political, cultural, academic, and economic lives. And all the components of the society, women of these components have been also taking part in the struggle against ISIS. And I say here that the Committee of Women, that we have also brought about a law to compensate women who fell victim of these groups, and now it is in the phase of voting on it, and the sisters, we hope, will be successful, and of course, there is a moral compensation is not sufficient because many of the women have suffered of many crimes, and it is really a severe crime. It is inhuman. And the participation of women in the international and regional activities is especially important to fight violence against women. And this, for example, also in parliamentary positions or in government positions. I was, for example, also vice president. I am now the chairman of the parliamentary Committee for Women and Children and Family, and we hope that we are now able to pass this draft law for women, to protect women. But of course, there are some parliamentary groups who have demanded to held more meetings of the parliament, and then it was sent to the Council of Ministers, to the presidency, and of course there is now the hope that this is now given back to the Committee of Women for a second reading of this draft law. And the Iraqi women still wait for a lot of their rights, their lack of rights in their positions in the parties, also in the executive. Of course, we have a quota, and so we have, for example, 25% in the parliament, and the same percentage in the executive, and in the leadership of parties, and in the electoral authorities, and also in the federal and in the institutions of the state. But this is not sufficient. When we see the emergency plan for Iraq, and we have some problems also in funding the implementation of such a plan, and during the past few years, we also suffered from a lack of resources in the implementation of Resolution 1325 and the action plan related to this. And the Council of Ministers has not sufficiently supported this plan so far. And there is not a general political accord about this plan. This is in the field of policy and of politics, and the role of women who really have to take part in peace building, in the development of the society, and in taking part in political and economic decisions, in fostering the development of the society and the empowerment of women, that they can really achieve their rights, and that they can also pass the laws that really guarantee justice, and that also the political speech is turned into practice. That means that through this, we will also enhance national unity, and in order to solve the pending problems. And of course, we have a lot of IDPs. We have a lot of refugees. And we have to alleviate their problems. And so thank you very much for listening. Peace be upon you. Thank you.
Thank you, Intisar. We are going to get back to you with some questions after Dr. Ilham Maki, the gender advisor and researcher at the Amal Association in Iraq, is going to talk to us about the contribution of the civil society in promoting the role of women in peace building in Iraq. Welcome to you, and please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. I'd like, obviously, to thank me to have given you the opportunity to participate here, to give the idea about the contribution of the civil society in promoting the role of women in peace building in Iraq. The organizations, these feminist organizations of the civil societies were the ones who were most interested in fostering this. So they made it a central issue with society and with the government. And they have put it actually on the table of discussions and made it a subject as such. There were activities done by the civil society through, for example, awareness-raising campaigns about fighting gender-based violence against women and children, particularly in most vulnerable groups. There were also a number of activities about political and economic empowerment of women through workshops. Of course, in all countries of the world, the economic factor is a very important one, and one of the most important ones, which is going to help women and children who are victims of violence to break the cycle of violence and escape from it. Also to create safe spaces for victims of violence. And also we were able to give out legal and social psychological support. We had advisors, and we did so from the civil society more than was done by the government, and particularly for groups which were far removed from the interests of the central government. We were able to organize a number of comprehensive activities which would go along with the broader outlines of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 within the context of emergency relief. But of course, over all the long years past, we have bumped into a number of obstacles, and we faced a number of barriers and hindrances which, well, at least have slowed down quite a bit our work in Iraq. It hasn't stopped completely, though, obviously. The first of these elements and these limitations and the barriers is the lack of political will. It's not the real reason for that, but it was accompanied by the tense security situation since 2003 in Iraq. And also the political crises accompanied this, which then greatly hindered the building up of civil society and fostering the role of women within it. Despite the direct military victories against ISIS and fighting it, we still do not have a national vision which works systematically on fighting the deeper causes and the root causes behind the violence against women. So we don't have also some vision looking into the deeper causes of this conflict. So we don't have a long-term plan to address the conflicts which Iraq is experiencing. And that is going to include a lot of things. So it's the hidden thing behind all of this. And that's why we are not able to address the issues of inequalities and violence against women fully, and that's why we encounter barriers and limitations. Also regarding the lack of political will, as I already mentioned, since 2003 up until now, we have been seeing that women are completely absent from procedures and measures of transitional justice, and that has had a huge impact on issues, addressing issues such as violence against women and inequalities. Intisar al-Jubouri mentioned already there's not enough funding, there's no budget assigned to this, and there are a lot of measures such as legislations which is only taken as only something written on papers. So there's a decision being made, and women are very capable in this sense. So I think the lack of political will is a bigger reason for not promoting the role of women in fostering peace building than the lack of funding. So we could have some funding and budget earmarking in each of the ministries and create sensitivity towards the issue of gender-based equality. But I'd still like to confirm that the lack of political will is the bigger factor and not the financial resources and the lack. So how can we improve the situation of women in Iraq in the legal framework, which I mentioned at the beginning already? The organizations of civil society have new capacities and capabilities to do lobby work and to exert pressure on legislation passing and at least stopping legislative projects which silently endorse violence against women. But now we face an obstacle in passing laws which are forbidding and making more difficult violence against women. For example, the draft law for the fight against domestic violence against women. We also try to pass towards cleaning all Iraqi legislations and laws which might include some kind of discrimination or direct or indirect violence against women. So a complete revision of all laws and legislations and cleaning them out of these things. But so far, civil society organizations, even though they interact very much with UN organizations and they write shadow reports, and we have a lot of experience with protecting women's rights, but there's still a weakness in using this structure in advocacy work, be it on the regional, local level or on the international level. And we still have also weaknesses in an early warning system, which we could use here. Civil society organizations could also move in the direction of how to guarantee. There were many activities, which is one of the positive side effects of the conflicts, that many marginalized women from different factions and different religious and ethnic backgrounds, despite the policies and strategies of the government, because of the conflict and because of delivering humanitarian aid, many organizations of the civil society and the government were finally able to reach these marginalized areas. And many of those women then became leaders in their own communities. So in general, the armed conflict is something negative, but there are also some potentially positive sides, which is breaking the closed limitations in these societies and communities where women have gained the opportunity to empower themselves to take new decisions which concern their lives. One of the ideas which might be a kind of recommendation would be setting up advisory committees on the regional level, which might mostly be composed of women. These councils or committees in each region, in the local communities, would have as a goal to solve issues resulting from the conflicts and crises which might be encountered by their local communities. This may be a recommendation which we could build upon and work on as civil society organizations with the government. I'm going to stick to that, and I'm ready to answer any questions and reply to any inquiries regarding the role and the participation of women in peace building in Iraq. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ilham. And of course, we will go back to the questions. Of course, there will be a discussion, and especially about what you have now contributed to the subject of peace building women. And you have mentioned the draft laws, which are now in the phase of passing or of amendment. And you have also mentioned the minorities, Yazidis, and so on. I would like to ask you, how is it possible to implement a national action plan in rural areas in a way that people there benefit from it? Laws and legislation which is passed and adopted by the parliament and so on may be there, but the problem is in implementation. How can these plans transformed into practice? Thank you very much for the interest for rural women. Rural women, of course, they have problems that might be economic and social problems. And in order to solve these problems, we need laws and we need to implement them. In Iraq, the problem is not only to pass laws, but also to implement these laws, and that such laws are really brought into reality, and that through civil society organizations, I think we can do this with their assistance, and but unfortunately women are marginalized to a lot, and government organizations and institutions are not active enough. And we have a special marginalization of women concerning especially the knowledge about their rights. They have no access to knowledge of their rights. And so civil society's task is to tell people what are their rights. The culture in Iraq is so that women have one of the traditions is that the women have the sensitivity to their land, to their soil, and so they depend also to the husband in cattle breeding, in responsibility for the work, and this is a big problem, and so they cannot demand from their husband or father to change this. So it is very important that they see that the positive health and also psychological health of women in the rural areas is very important. And of course, there are many opinions now how to change this. And for example, also the Director of Health is very active in this field. That means also physical health of women is also important, and this is also one of the recommendations in this conference, that of course government institutions but also organizations of the civil society, that they work in this direction, especially to fight for example cancer and other diseases which are also very dangerous for children. So it is important that there is a plan of the government to address this subject with the help of civil society organizations, also that they come about with their recommendations also on the basis of the second National Action Plan, and this in cooperation with the Health Ministry. Thank you very much. Let us go back to Dr. Ilham. We have heard that there is a deficiency, that there is a lack in addressing women in the different areas. And unfortunately, we must say it is positive that it is difficult to get access to these women. In the point of view of the civil society, how is it possible to bridge the gap between urban and rural women? And we have already heard something about this, but maybe there are other informations that you can give us. And how do you evaluate the importance of those women in peace-building processes, and what are the challenges between rural and urban areas? Of course, there are big differences, and this subject is of a historic character. Do you hear me? Is my voice clear? Yeah. Yes, we are hearing you. Of course, there are several campaigns. The previous systems, 2003, had done something, but now women, especially in the rural areas, they have to suffer a lot. And Mrs. Jabouri has also mentioned this before. And of course, it is important that we have progressive laws and legislation, but so far, rural women have not benefited from this. And there's also the political side. One has also to show some framework, political framework for these women, and to overcome the discrimination of women in comparison with women in the cities. And there's nothing which is called that women in the rural areas, that they are active in agriculture. For example, it is said among my sisters, my cousins, that this is impossible, that it is impossible that land is given to girls or to women. It is always given to the male members of the family, and the female members wouldn't get any parcel of land. And this has certainly historic reasons, also structural reasons. And so it is important to have a law, and that this law is not only focused on the cities, as it has been the case so far. Of course, there is now a discussion about this, and this is positive. And there's also this is also in connection with armed groups. That means that such societies should play, that means local societies should play a bigger role and should have more influence on the government. But this needs, of course, assistance and support, and this would help rural women a lot. And we can also help also in research, by research work. Or we had 2 weeks ago a meeting in Negev, and where we discussed education, which is now a problem in the countryside, and concerning mixed gender schools. But we said this is a basis and a starting point for every process of the guaranteeing equal rights between males and females. And we see in the rural areas that we don't have enough education, in addition to further empowerment about information, about legislation and so on. So these steps, all these steps are very important also in the future. So far, of course, awareness raising is very important. We have the social media, we have globalization and all these things, but frankly, we do not even have enough awareness raising about this. It's not really clear for the government how to develop these communities. Often women do not know how to live, how to provide livelihood, and so we need. We are not able to guarantee modern development without meeting these basic needs, and so we have still this discussion. And thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to go deeper into the subject. I'd like to get back to Saida and to Mrs. Intisar. These obstacles and these plans, given that you're also a member of the Iraqi parliament and you spoke about the one of the most important obstacles, which are the resources and the funding, isn't it the case, that's a question, isn't the parliament the one who's deciding upon the general public budget and would have to decide this based on the needs? And if there is a real need in supporting the role of women and national plans for bringing women to the front, isn't there the role of the parliament in distributing the resources on the national level and also controlling and following up the using? Thank you very much. We, as the Iraqi parliament, do not have the right to add any additional money to the budget. We received the draft budget from the government according to the plan set up. We don't have the right to add anything to it. For example, to add anything to earmark any budget to the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, but we have the right of vetoing. Some female deputies in the parliament have already demanded within the sessions of certain commissions that also women's rights might be incorporated in the budget for the 2021 budget. That was a proposal also for the recent budget. We have not encountered a real political will to bring this through. I already said that the budget of the Iraqi government is mainly relying on the export of petrol, 98%. And now, given that the prices have gone down, so we had to lend money, and this is only going to go into covering the salaries of government employees. And okay, there's a telephone sound in the background. So we have also some money earmarked for the Higher Committee of Elections. Sorry for the coughing. Anyway, regarding between the parties is not always the priorities of parties are not always the issues of women. We have big parties in the parliament. We also have smaller parties whose voices are not being heard when it is about distributing this money and funds being earmarked in the budget. The sound quality is bad, sorry. So we have not been able to introduce many points in the budget to accompany the needs for more funding and setting up programs for civil society organizations in the case of implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. And this is going to be one of the priorities of the Women's Committee in the budget for the budget of 2022, hoping that this is going to be taken more into consideration during the first and second readings of the draft projects. And again, stating that the Parliament has no rights and no powers to add anything to the budget unless the government agrees to that. We can only refuse or veto things. So we have transferred these wishes to the Ministry of Social Affairs. We have been able to earmark certain funds for widows, for example, and so on and so forth. So we'd hope that the law on on victims of violence is also going to include some parts on how it is going to be financed and funded, because it will need such funding, because we would need to set special courts, particularly for the Yazidi women, because they're mainly from rural areas and they need to continue and complement their education so they can be integrated in Iraqi society again. And so we hope to have a role in introducing a budget that responds to gender-based concerns. So if we can vote on it, I say so I'm very proud and fond of all my other colleagues in the palace. But I have to say, unfortunately, they're very far from implementing what would be good for women's affairs in Iraq and to do justice to them. This is not a priority of the main political factions in the parliament. And some are just paying lip service to their commitments to include more women in the parliament and women's issues. Sorry, the sound quality is not very good here.
Dr. Ilham, what are the lessons you can mention about success in Iraq, and what has not been successfully implemented concerning rights and peace building? Can you please give us some impression about success and failure? Of course, certainly the changes that have taken place in Iraq after 2003, they have caused a lot of challenges. For women, there are some achievements we couldn't deny, and Mrs. Jamhouri has, for example, already mentioned the quota and the bigger role of women in the political field concerning the number of women, and they are more open, more active in comparison with other countries in the region. And of course, on the other hand, there are big challenges still, which are also inherited from the Baas system. That, for example, concerning life and rights of women, but this is more or less personal positions within a development project. After 2003, the new governments or the different governments, they did not have enough address the matter of women. Of course, they didn't sufficiently see women as part of the development project. They just wanted to win women during elections, but otherwise they were not very interested. And for the role of women in a far extent concerning the social change, which is not visible, and which is a special problem problem for women is that the opening of Iraq, use of internet and social media and so on, and activities of the civil society organizations, international organizations, the United Nations and so on. Of course, this has helped a lot in disseminating ideas and also fostering the talents of women. In the beginning, started by training the government in doing this, but in fact it is the civil society to empower women. But as I said, there's still a lack of political will, and there are not enough models, political systems, which means to the implementation. There's discussion, there's dialogue, there are positive responding and words, but after such meetings, it appears that there is not really a serious step to turn this into practice. Either they don't do any step, or there's simply no interest in doing this. This is also important for them to be in power and to keep the financial resources. Of course, as long as we have only oil as the main source of income, there will still be a conflict among the different groups of the society. And of course, on the other hand, there are also a lack in accounting, in the accountability. Of course, we have now a young generation, but even outside the civil society organizations, so that means we have not always direct contact or activation of youth in order to foster their knowledge. No, it is also outside the civil society organizations. That means there is really also a theoretical and also law conscience about this, but I have the impression that the government is really afraid of such generations, and that they are very so mature, and that there are people in some positions, and some people in some positions in the government are afraid of this. Mrs. Intisar, part of the process for peace building, there are also committees, peace committees on the local basis. Are they active? Is it possible to include women and to give them a role in these committees, to give them a voice? And Dr. Ilham has already mentioned that we have also, I don't want to say conflicts, political conflicts, but of course there are different positions, political positions among the parties, and of course parties try to control such committees, even if those committees have been built by women. In fact, we still do not have enough presence of women in such committees. For example, the National Reconciliation Committee, they have only 1, 2, or even if it is 10 female members, but this is not enough. Women are not fully represented, only by 2 or 3 women, and but half of the Iraqi society are women, even more women than men. That means neglect of the role of women is very important, and it is important that women are given a voice in these processes, in the conflict solution, and in dealing with the implications of war. Of course, they must play a role. I'm sorry, in coexistence, in national reconciliation. Unfortunately, there are technical problems. And as you said, of course, the responsible people in the parties have to bear a lot of responsibility for this, to integrate women or to improve their position in this field of life. And that decisions are taken with the participation of women. And I mentioned these committees, reconciliation committees, but at the moment their role is not as it is necessary and required currently. And they are only papers. There is a presence of some instructions, but their activity in the different regions among IDPs and so on, and any recommendations, if there are any recommendations, are very much limited. So far, we don't have any real decision. There is something to control them, but unfortunately, the subject of reconciliation is just a subject of the media, and in fact, you do not really have the feeling that you can be hopeful that something can be achieved. For example, in the Nineveh province, it is very important that they achieve results, especially also to prosecute those who have committed crimes against the women. And we, through our control role, we have tried to foster this, but so far these committees should work in a broader way and should be better funded. And in addition to this, they don't have the possibility of get access to the different places. So even reports about their work cannot be used, and the government does not respond to such reports. And we had not only wanted to go into these committees, but also to control these committees. And I am from Nineveh, and I have not felt that they are really existent there in the refugee camps or among IDPs. German state has, of course, tried to support this, and we are very grateful for this assistance from the German side, and we also very grateful that they have been also received by the Yazidi women. Unfortunately, it was necessary that Yazidi women are provided with the services, with the special programs, and so far this is only done by foreign countries, among them the German state, but the Iraqi government unfortunately does not have any special programs to address the problems of of refugee women, of Yazidi women, and we just rely on the support from Germany and other states in Iraq.
There are questions which are coming in from the audience and from the participants and the listeners. For Ilham, how did civil society organizations react to what was written in the draft law of the protection against domestic violence? I would like to add another question here, which has to do with how do you see the response to the advocacy campaign regarding this law from the government and the parliament? Regarding the efforts of civil society organizations, we have mostly participated in drafting this law project for over 10 years. Civil society organizations, as I mentioned already, have the biggest merit in leading the cause of the fight against the violence against the women. I do not even have a measure or a plan that the government has taken in this regard. No plan. If you ask me, what are the measures undertaken by government by itself on its own initiative, there are no such plans and initiatives. All these efforts have all come from civil society organizations, from the local communities, and also from UN organizations and international sites. So the efforts were undertaken by them and us. And I can also say what we've reached is a phase, for me, when many say we have reached a goal and we are going to pass that law, but we always have these political crises and they always bring us back to, let's say, point zero, to start again from scratch. We have not worked in a simple and at the same pace always, so that we were really able to achieve the goal. I could say that we really could pass this legislation and that everything is ready and to go. Then we had the demonstrations, then we had Corona and protests and so on and so forth. So this pressure is an additional effort undertaken, but unfortunately that's always put into a certain phase and then it stops. And then we'd have to go back again and undertake the same efforts. And that's the same thing that has been happening over and over again for the past 10 years for passing the legislation of the law against the violence against women. So there are enormous efforts undertaken by civil society organizations. So what is the role of the government here? And as I mentioned before, there's a lack of political will. I already said that they have experience acquired stalling and in transparency. I would not say lying, but in transparency, there were many conferences and workshops we've attended. We have really had scientific meetings. We have tried to discuss what the reasons and justifications and the arguments were forward by certain factions in the parliament were and certain parties were, because they have religious and so on arguments they bring forward. And we also try to listen to what the opposition has to say, and they have reservations towards the law. For example, they, said that's against the Islamic law. And then what they say, I'd like to mention Ibtisam, who is the head of the Department of Women's Empowerment in the Council of Ministers. So she gathered a group of women. They went to the higher leader of the Shia faction in Iraq, and they discussed with the religious authority leader, and he was in the end agreeing to the draft law. And then they went back to the parliament, and then the parliament came up and the factions came up with irrational justifications and arguments, and they pretended that they were and behaved as if they were real objections. And regarding the rejection of the government, in 2018, there was a call made to the parliament to really bring forward legislation that it would be allowed for men to beat or hit their wives. So there was a call to change this. There was also something with the federal court, and that said that they should make this illegal, that there would be the right for a husband to hit his wife. And the response that was come up with by Parliament was something that does not respect the rights of women and human rights in general. And they came up with justifications which had nothing to do with changing a law. And there's some definition. I mean, how can I be convinced as a woman that a man has the right to punish me or to discipline me for something I've done? That was in 2018. There were many political powers who I would consider reactionary, and also the government and also the judiciary, which considered itself a neutral party, which it isn't in fact. It has all its statistics about the cases, and it is registering and recording all cases of violence against women. But they have not undertaken any step in this regard. They have not made any proposal to the government or to the parliament. Thank you very much. I would like to move on again to Intisar. From this example to the example of laws pertaining particularly to Yazidi women or any other laws. So what are the measures taken for reparations and paying out remunerations to victims of violence, particularly to the survivors of Yazidi women, in regard to what is done to other minorities? So what are these measures? I mean, there is a law now, but what are the measures from your point of view now? Regarding the law on recompensating our Yazidi sisters, I would say that there are different minorities of parties or groups in the Iraqi societies which were also considered in this law. All the deputies he contributed to the second reading of this law project, draft law. The sound is gone. Sorry, the sound quality is not good. And they all said they're all victims. They have to be done justice, and they should include also the Yazidi women. Measures which are undertaken, the Iraqi government has arrested many criminals. They've also been arresting perpetrators of crimes against Yazidi women, and the judiciary has taken up these cases and has started prosecuting because their psychological state and the impacts have been so grave. And sorry, the sound quality is very bad. So all this has been destroyed, and the mosques and the measures which have been undertaken so that they're trying to speed up the decision-taking in these cases against the perpetrators and taking particular interest in the concerned areas such as Sinjar, the province of Nineveh, also the rebuilding of the infrastructure and the rehabilitation of these regions. Our sisters have gone back to school. So, they have been handed back their personal property, and they have now, which has been taken away by the perpetrators. We have helped with this, and also bringing them back to school and bringing them back into education. They've also similar measures in the Kurdistan region, and I can only confirm that the Yazidi women were very close geographically to the Kurdistan region, also linguistically, and there was a special interest psychologically, and they were treated, and there were special committees in the Kurdistan region to provide special services to reintegrate them into society in cooperation with the local society. We all know that Yazidi community is very isolated and closed off to the outside world. So there was efforts to help the survivors who were still young women and basically children who had survived ISIS capture, to find a solution for these children, because those women had been raped, and we should not deprive the women from their children because they're still mothers. Whatever the crimes ISIS committed against them, of course they're crimes, but the women are not criminals, so they shouldn't be deprived from their children, so they're victims, and the children should not suffer from that. We have prepared a solution for them. The sound quality is very bad. So that they can be granted Iraqi citizenship because their mothers are Iraqi nationals. So there are going to be flexible solutions to grant Iraqi citizenship to them. But the problem is always a religious one, which is mentioned very often. We are aware of the fact that in the civil personal affairs registers, we usually note down Muslim, so these children are going to be recorded as Muslims until they reach the age of 18, and then they would have to write as a girl or a boy to choose which religion they would have to like to be entered into civil registers offices. So these things should really be implemented, and child, when it reaches the age of maturity, can choose if it wants to be a Muslim or not, officially recorded, so they can be independent. There is a research, a study, which is going to focus on the inclusion of this article. The sound is interrupted. There's disturbance on the line. So we're trying to address this situation so Yazidi women are not deprived from their children, to take them back to their regions when they return. The Yazidi women, we still live in the IDP camps, even though Yazidi women have gone back to their families and to their region. Some Yazidi women have preferred to do so because they prefer to stay in the camps because their relatives and their community do not appreciate non-Yazidi children getting back into the communities. I do not want to do injustice to the Yazidi community, and the higher authority should hand out a recommendation. I don't know what term to use here. I know that the Yazidi women are dear sister, and they're very honorable. And the authorities has also encouraged Yazidi men to marry Yazidi women once they've returned to their communities. And that's why I'd say that these measures are quite positive. If you want to evaluate the measures undertaken by the government, they are in fact quite weak, and they have not reached the level to match the crimes which has been committed against all the Yazidi women and also the Sunni and other women and all the other groups in society. And there is a subject, an issue that Yazidi women, of course, it has become public that this crime has been committed and genocide has been committed. But most of the victims, the female victims, were not able to proclaim publicly that they have been victims of rape. But now, with the draft law closely being passed, that is publicly being announced, and the survivors from all other groups, they had a meeting with the President of the Republic, and we were with them. And the President mentioned then that they are going to be included in this law, and that they're going to have equality, and enjoy the same rights and entitlements as the Yazidi women. So the other groups are going to be included in this draft law and to provide them the same rights as survivors.
The contribution, of course, this will also cause further questions. Of course, there's another question about the extent of the influence of the social society. Dr. Ilham, in the reintegration of surviving women. Can you please give us some information about the efforts that are taken in this transition period and in peace building in Iraq? And the same question also to Mrs. Desar about the justice, transition justice and so on. But first of all, I would like to refer to the subject of survivors and of transitional justice. I have already mentioned that the efforts of the social society were started very early, and we tried to protect to protect the women, or to re-qualify them psychologically in the society. And so the social society had a lot of influence concerning by opening centers also for psychological counseling and so on. And so, of course, this is only one component for the help of women, especially also Yazidi women and women of other religions. But I have also to say that some of the components of Yazidi women, the religious authorities have said that they are accepted coming back. But we have also other problems with Turkmens. We have a lot of Daesh crimes against Turkmen women, and so there have really been big efforts, and we still are trying to provide services to overcome the problems of financing, especially for the activities of civil society organizations. We want that psychological, legal support is continuing, and that also safe havens are opened up by the government. And so it is difficult to protect women who experience violence. This is so far only an activity of the civil society. So if a woman is experiencing violence, or this can step up, and she can be even killed, and she needs support. She needs to be that these problems are really addressed and solved. But efforts that are taken in this area, these are the efforts of civil society organizations who try to integrate these women. But these organizations have very limited possibilities. And if we see these services that are provided, they are not sufficient. So far, Yazidi women, still live in camps. They don't have schools, they don't have economic basis, they do not receive any psychological or material support. And there's a lack of financing. Financing is not sufficient. And we have so many cases of violence in Iraq, and we should really raise the awareness about this violence against women, and then also resistance. Resistance has a value, and so also for Yazidi women in cases of violence and of domestic violence, it is necessary that they know their rights. Unfortunately, in the whole of Iraq, there are not enough services that address this subject. We still live in a conflict situation. We have not really achieved transitional justice. We always talk about saving, surviving women, so giving resources and so on, but there are not enough measures, and also to improve the legislation for those women is not sufficient. And for example, if the perpetrator marries a victim, he will not be punished. And for example, a Yazidi woman who was raped by a man, and according to law, if there is a contract, a marriage contract, it is accepted by religious authorities. Unfortunately, this is a problem. Mrs. Intisar, concerning transitional justice and the efforts taken here also in peace building, in your opinion, how are the measures? Are they sufficient? Are they pursued? Are they implemented currently? What is done now? We cannot say that there's nothing, but there is a little bit of that, and it is weak. We have concerning social justice, we need, of course, compensation. We need also to take perpetrators to court, but the many responsible people are not too much interested in this, and especially also in the many cannot be punished because they have fled outside Iraq, and we have still more than 2,000 abducted women, and the government has not taken sufficient measures to solve this inside or outside Iraq. And concerning the money and the compensation, the previous Minister of Labor has done something which is worth mentioning, and that means especially also to protect witnesses, to support survivors, but they were given some support, and about $100 or so, and so this measure, this step was a beginning, a starting point, but it was some support for Yazidi women, but it was, of course, a little only, very small amounts, and it is not sufficient to meet their special needs. Concerning the legislation, the law on survival women. In this context, I have met surviving women. I've gone there, and there was the discussion about a law which gives a period of 20 years to deal with this subject, and there was also a political will to step up to be faster in passing such a law, and that there is really equitability, not only on a religious basis, but also in the psychological, in the health field, and so on. There are programs for surviving sisters to compensate them, to help them. This is not only support, but it is not only to help them to return to their homes, but also to give them their children back, and even to qualify to the women and children, especially who have suffered from crimes committed by ISIS. And so there are some measures, but they are very weak, and the problem is that this is not sufficient, especially for the Yazidi sisters. I think that the subject of the court, especially federal court, I always criticize the lack of women in this court. Who can really deal with the problems of women better than women themselves. And so we need the participation of women in the decision-making, and we have 66 members of parliament who have also supported this in a paper, and in order to give, for example, the rights to women who have experienced rape, and within 3 years, and women who have become victims of crime, that they have also the possibility to marry. At present, it is so that when they are not married, they run the risk of being killed. But the contrary should be that we should really solve these problems and protect them from being killed, and to have them also that they can marry, that this marriage is accepted. And we should also fight these crimes, like rape crimes, and we should so this violation of women's rights also includes that people, that the men perpetrators can be pardoned, and so it is very important that women get their rights, that they can really select their husband, and especially we still are suffering from this problem, and this of course has a big influence and impact, especially also concerning the marriage outside of court, and also girl marriage is still existent, and we unfortunately have a generation which is not aware of these problems, and there's not enough thinking and not enough awareness about this, especially also health and physical and mental health problems, especially concerning marriage. And we have passed a law which has now passed the two readings, the first and the second reading, and is now under discussion. And this is the personal status law. And this is done in cooperation with the civil society. And we want to defend the law against domestic violence, and also the new personal status law, especially to prevent girl marriage. This gives girls the possibility to build up their own lives. And of course, this is also a question how to deal with the family of the husband when it comes to violence or domestic violence. So, and thus I say we have not yet been able to do enough for for girl brides, and still there is girl marriage in 14, 15, 16 years old, and this happens. And this is not allowed in court, but outside the court, especially poor people are still doing this. And so this personal status law is I asked why does this civil status law allow this girl a marriage, and I didn't get an answer. And I said it is necessary to consider this question, but of course we see that especially poor people, they don't have enough money to provide children with livelihood, and it is not possible for them to send their girls to school and so on. So this is also important to pass a law about the obligatory schooling of all the children, and so this will improve the situation of young boys and girls, and this will also give the possibility to help also girls, daughters, to go to school and to help the families of them. And so this subject of obligatory education is very helpful to give them education and to avoid girl marriage. And we say, of course, we have a comprehensive revolution in Iraq, and so we also have to concentrate on education.
Dr. Ilham, there's a question of the representative of GIZ for Mrs. Susan Leichtweiss to Ilham and also to Intisar. What can the role of international organizations be, and what is the form of support that might be efficient and effective? So first of all, maybe Dr. Ilham, and then we can go back to Intisar again. I think we have a technical problem in communication with Ilham. Maybe Intisar, you can answer it. Yes, we have interruptions in the internet connection and also power cut-offs. Maybe that's what's happening to Dr. Ilham. Okay, now Intisar is speaking again. The support of international organizations. Okay, we're speaking about liberating Iraq. all countries in the world, or the international coalition, which was with the participation of most countries. Now we have, from the liberation, resulting cities which are almost completely destroyed, and completely destroyed psychology as well. Also many problems resulting from the control and the occupation by ISIS, also that they were not able to go to schools and to universities and so on and so forth. So we have support from outside countries, international parties, to also the destroyed region. And they're being helped in rehabilitating and rebuilding the completely destroyed areas. Also on the level of the return of internally displaced and refugees. So now the efforts undertaking on this level. The Prime Minister has also suggested in its government program that the IDPs should return to their areas, but that cannot happen without the infrastructure being present and rehabilitated. In Mosul, the international community played a huge role, the United Nations, in helping with this. Also German and French organizations, which played a role in rebuilding parts of the infrastructure of the Western provinces. All international organizations support local organizations. We cannot go without the support from international sides, from all parts, be it on the economic level or empowerment or the reintegration of women who have been exposed to violence, which are being implemented by local civil society organizations with the support of international organizations to help women and to reintegrate women victims in local communities, to rehabilitate the infrastructure, to rehabilitate women who were victims of violence, also domestic violence. The Committee of Women and Children's Affairs have tried also to support families, and I'd really like to praise here the role of organizations over the past decade, which have played a great role in supporting our committee over the last decade. I've also closely cooperated with the Al-Amal Association, where Ilham is working. There was also some military work where they can play a role in the future. So regarding schools and the cooperation with local organizations to rehabilitate schools and to reintroduce teachers, also to do justice to these female survivors. We need rehabilitation and training for the implementation of this law. From the start, I said that is law which is not being implemented, and the implementation also needs the fact that people who are responsible for implementing it are sufficiently qualified and trained. That's why we need your role very much. And of course, you're going to leave an imprint on the rehabilitation of the integration of the infrastructure and the reintegration of female survivors of violence by ISIS into their local communities, and in helping to rebuild what has been completely destroyed, and also to do justice to the victims of the enormous crimes committed by ISIS. I'm not only talking about Yazidi women. We need the rehabilitation of the entire society. Also, the young people need programs and reintegration in the job market. And we need to change the view of society so that they can really be small projects which help these young people to regain control of their lives and to lower the level of unemployment, and there we need the support of international organizations from outside, also for the civil society organizations locally. We are going to go back to Dr. Ilham Makr because she's now online again. Again, the question, what can be the role of international organizations? Which kinds of forms can it take to be efficient to support women in peace building in Iraq? And possibly, once you've answered this question, you can have one last word, because before I go back to Intisar once more to have her have the concluding words for this panel today. Thank you very much. First of all, organizations supported by international organizations, UN organizations, for sure we would not have reached many of the steps we've been able to undertake to help women without their support, to protect women from violence. Also, they supported us on a knowledge level. And I'd like to stress that we need the continuity of the support, also to make use of international mechanisms and tools. That is still quite weak with us, so we can go on to exert pressure on the governments to legalize laws, for example, and to pass them, and also to have them implemented, these laws, for example, to develop the system of transferring it to the courts. But the system of transferring it in the courts for the victims of violence, in particular sexual violence, this system is during this transport of these victims, there's also violence being done. So empowerment of women, as I mentioned, how can we make use of international mechanisms and pressurize the government? For example, now the economic situation in Iraq is bad. Maybe we could try to use this negative side and try to exert pressure on the government. There should not be a specific condition. Working with civil society organizations, how can we improve to stop violence against women through lifting discrimination against them in many other areas? So we need pressure here. We need a new reading even of the UN Resolution 1325. We know that the government has to stick to this resolution, has to commit to it. But unless there is nothing clearly pressuring the government, it is going to create another obstacle to and hinder our efforts. And I said we undertake huge efforts, but then we always have crises coming up, and then we always go back to the starting point and start from scratch again, and that is time lost and efforts lost. So if we want to talk about organizations, we need the ongoing support, particularly making use of the mechanism on the national and international level to pressurize the government and also to pressure governments in certain ways to interact with civil society organizations to promote the role of women in peace building in Iraq. So the concluding remarks, I would like to thank you for having given us this opportunity to speak up about our challenges, about our obstacles we are facing, and at the same time to give our specific vision for our causes. And I'd also like to point out the risks that are still ongoing, very far removed from embellishing and compliments. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'd hope to see more such meetings. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Ilham. Intisar, maybe your final input about the role of women in peace building in Iraq, and any concluding remarks or recommendations within a minute or a minute and a half, if possible, please. I'd say that the role of women let's pressurize the presidency of Iraq to issue a second implementation plan for the resolution. And secondly, let's earmark the necessary funds and resources to implement this plan, so we have the possibilities and the means to implement this plan. And we, in the face of transitional justice, the government has to take the necessary measures to grant the justice and rights to all victims, and to have women participate also in local civil society organizations, to pressurize on the government and factions in the parliament. And the law is going to be passed within the upcoming few weeks, the law on domestic violence, which we have been working on since 2010. And so far, we've been working with civil society organizations, which is very timely at this very point in time. And we need the necessary mechanisms to implement it, at least in the upcoming future. And in this particular time frame, and that is considered an achievement in this particular period, to face and address the issue of violence against women, particularly in this period of Corona. We have seen women committing suicides, burning themselves, and also women drowning their children in the Euphrates River because they've been exposed to such a great amount of violence at a very young age. So we strongly condemn the violence, and we'd like to see this law being passed so we can say that we've achieved something for women and the victims. And I'd also hope that you are going to cooperate with us as a Committee for Women and Children's Affairs to pass this law and to work on the empowerment of women within the parliament, to work with the factions in the parliament to pass this law. Thank you very much once more for having supported women in Iraq. Thank you also to Dr. Elham, and thank you to all the participants and for all those who have listened and attended this, to have listened to my recommendations. And I'd hope that the recommendations of this conference are going to be implemented, and that are not only going to remain recommendations in the period which is still open-end. So we need serious work to implement these recommendations and also to have an oversight of this implementation. Thank you to who had a very important role in communicating with us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Intisar, for your concluding input. Thank you, Intisar Al-Jabouri, member of the Iraqi Parliament, and Dr. Elham Makki, gender advisor and researcher for your contributions, your very interesting contributions.